So, Berto, I don't know if you know this, but at the end of 2021, I spent a number of weeks answering every single email in the archive, every single email that was left to be addressed on the podcast.
Yikes.
I went through hours and hours and hours of it to answer every single, but there were some questions that I left for you and me to answer. So that's what I was thinking about doing today. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda. I'm a local lawn polisher.
Listener Diana from Germany says, what are your thoughts on the so-called Reborn dolls? People seem to get them for all... Do you know what Reborn dolls are, Berto?
I'm imagining it has to do something with reborn Christians.
No, it's a doll. It's a baby that looks extremely real.
Oh, okay.
And adults will have them and feed them and talk to them and hang out with them.
Why are they called Reborn?
I think because, that's a good question. I don't know why they're called that, but okay. if you like Google Reborn dolls and just take a look, they're extremely. It's like the uncanny valley in a sense, but
they're like real dolls, but reborn dolls.
Yeah, if you look at them, you can tell that they're not real, but they're really realistic looking. Like you could see these being used.
Oh, wow. I'm seeing the pictures.
You could see them being used in like a movie or something.
Yikes.
You know?
It's scary how realistic that looks.
Yeah. And
that would be a little
and they're different.
Frightening.
They're different races and genders and looks on their faces. Yeah, it's very... And some of the Reborn dolls are like 5-year-olds, their genitalia will be there. Anyway.
This is weird.
Yeah. So, listener Diana says, what are your thoughts on so-called Reborn dolls? People seem to get them for all kinds of reasons. As a collector's item, as a form of artistic expression, but sometimes also as some kind of replacement. And the topic seems to be very divisive. A lot of people find it weird or creepy, saying things like, adults shouldn't have dolls, or it's unhealthy. What are your thoughts about this? Both on people getting these dolls and on people having such strong negative reactions to the dolls. Is there maybe some sexism involved? With it being such a female interest, whereas arguably similar male hobbies like model trains or drone flying don't get nearly as much pushback? Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, this is fascinating. I had not heard about this. Well, I got a couple thoughts. On seeing the pictures, I am a little disturbed because they do look so real. I don't know how it would feel seeing one in person. It's probably like looking at a wax statue, but because it's a baby, you would think it'd be like, oh, it's so cute, but it is uncanny.
Yeah, they're not. They seem to be going more for realism than cuteness. I mean, they're trying to make them cute, but if you really wanted to make them cute, you would make them not so eerily real. You know what I mean? There's a way to make a cute baby that is cute without trying to make it look like an actual human being.
Well, and that's part of it, is I think that if I'm holding something that looks exactly or very close to a real baby, but it's not alive, it might feel to me like I'm holding a dead baby. And that might really traumatize me. Anyways, so I think that. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, well, wait, what if, you lost a baby, or maybe you can't have a baby or whatever, and you need that feeling, and maybe this is a way. I mean, I play with dolls, I played with dolls for sure, like action figures, and I still have action figures. Those are dolls. So maybe there is an angle here, which is like it can be therapeutic, it can be, you can feel some sort of companionship with it, or...
Yeah. So a lot of my life these days seems to be concerned with this, this dilemma of, is it creepy or not? And there are certain things that are just given as creepy, right? I would imagine 99% of people that aren't in the Reborn doll community, of which there is one, and it's very insular, if you will, very protective of its kind, then I'm guessing 99% of people are like, ew, that's creepy. But I think we need to evaluate that creepy reaction, because so much of what we consider to be creepy is not problematic. You know,
Yeah.
I'm old, and it's one thing about being old is I remember a lot of things being creepy before that are no longer considered creepy. Gay people were considered creepy when I was young.
Yeah.
Everyone, most people were, ew, gay person. Of course, today we'd say not only is that stupid and weird, but it's offensive and heterosexist. It's,
That's right.
you know, on the spectrum of a hate crime to say that a gay person is creepy just because they're gay, you know. Trans people were considered creepy. And when I watch these reality TV shows, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a trope of creepiness, you know, like age difference in a relationship. You'll have a 55-year-old guy with a 30-year-old woman, and you're like, oh my God, he's old enough to be her father. That's creepy. And I'm always like, is it creepy? Like, and what do you mean by creepy? Do you mean like you're uncomfortable with it? I think what people mean by, well, what do you think people mean when they say that's creepy?
Yeah, I think it is uncomfortable. It's mainly disgust. There's a level of disgust. If we think back to the Inside Out archetypes, like disgust is a useful thing we have, right? So it's in fact disgust that would make it not want us to have incest or be with someone that seems harmful to us.
Right.
So
like
it's
someone eating their own poop, like that's creepy, right?
So it's like, wait, 20-year difference. That's disgust. That's creepy.
Right. But I think there's another element to the creep that you're not talking about, which is that it's harmful, that it's wrong, that it's not just gross. Like if someone were to pick up a snake, and you walk into their house and all of a sudden they like start hanging out with their snake, you might have a creepy disgust reaction if you don't like snakes yourself. You'd be like, ooh, that's creepy. Yeah. But you wouldn't necessarily say that there's harm from that, that there's something wrong with it. Like it's a social wrong that someone has a snake. Most people are like, yeah, people have snakes, they have lizards. But I think when it comes to age difference in relationships or reborn dolls or whatever, anything along these lines, when it's creepy, it's like there's something morally wrong with it. It's not just that it's disgusting. I think we have this conflation between I'm uncomfortable with this and therefore it's a morally wrong thing to do.
Sure, yeah.
Which is a heuristic that probably rings true in some instances, like murder or rape or sexual assault or something of a child. But when it comes to reborn dolls, we have to look at that and say, is there any harm? Does it harm anyone? In the same way that in the 80s, I said to people, is there any harm for people being gay? Because if there's no harm, then the creepiness is on you, my friend.
Right.
The creepiness is not on the gay people. The creepiness is your problem, not the gay person's problem. So if you're creeped out by reborn dolls, that's on you. Unless you can demonstrate that the reborn doll phenomenon is harmful to society or others in some way, then you're just having a reaction based on culture. There are certain other cultures of the world that will do things very different than you will. They will pray 5 times a day. That's weird to you. Or they'll wear jewelry that does, or they won't wear a shirt. There are certain communities around the world where the women don't wear shirts and their breasts are just out there. To you, if you saw someone on the subway with their breasts out, you'd be like, ew, creepy. And you would consider that to be a moral wrong. It's not morally wrong. It's a cultural difference. It's a cultural understanding or maybe even a legal thing based on culture. But it's not inherently harmful in the same way that rape or sexual assault or murder or stealing or lying or exploitation or genocide, there are things that we can agree on that are morally wrong.
Yeah.
Having a reborn doll and you being creeped out by it, that's on you, in my opinion. In the same way that, there are people who play video games a lot and they have like an online avatar that might have a different identity. It might be a neckbeard dude with a very thin woman avatar, and he likes to he wants to make everyone think that he's this thin elf or something.
Right.
And from the outside of that community, you might be like, that's creepy and weird. And it's like, no, that's just not something you're used to, lay off, live and let live. Or furries, for example, is another common, people in the furry community are stigmatized. And it's like, are they harming anyone? No. Now, can someone in the furry community harm someone else? Yeah, but someone in the non-furry community can harm someone else. It's not, the furry community isn't dressing up as a fox, whether it's sexual or not, isn't inherently harmful to other human beings.
Yeah.
Love dolls, some lonely dude in Japan buys a love doll that's $5,000 and he makes love to it every night and talks to it every night. Is that a problem? No. Now, can it be a problem? Sure. But it's not inherently wrong or creepy. Just because it's not something you're used to doesn't mean that it's wrong. And it honestly, you should really think twice before you go, ew, gross.
There's some line somewhere which it's hard to know. Like, for example, if some manufacturer sold real dolls, but they were sort of marketed in a way it's like where you could be abusive to them or something,
Well, who cares? It's a thing. If I'm a boxer and I buy one of those boxing body things, you've seen that real common. It's sort of a no neck dude that that boxing dummy that people use a lot. And I bring that into my house and I beat the crap out of it, and I don't harm anyone, any actual human being, because of that. Then what's the difference? If you buy a reborn doll and you proceed to do whatever you want to it, that might be hard for you to kind of internalize, but it's not inherently, unless you, Burrow, can make an argument that somehow creates harm to people, then I think that's just one of those things you just have to live and let live.
But I don't know if the brain is that well insulated against influences, right?
Well, so if there's research that demonstrates that somehow the activity of the reborn, I think what you're getting at is someone has a slight tendency to want to sexually abuse a baby, and they buy a reborn doll. It's the gateway drug to real babies.
Yeah.
If there's research that demonstrates that, then yeah. But that's not the vast majority of the reborn doll community. That'd be like saying someone buys a car and runs over people. Well, let's get rid of cars. It's like,
but just imagine someone opens a company that makes adult dolls that they look transsexual or they're transsexual, and the whole thing is like, hey, buy this so you can abuse and be mean to transsexual dolls.
Well,
in theory, you're not harming a human being, but the whole promotion of the company, the whole angle of it is disturbing, wrong.
Well, I don't see how that's even close to an analogy for the reborn doll. I mean, this is some extension.
No. Because what I'm trying to say, I started this whole segment by saying that there must be a line somewhere, and I'm not sure where the line is. Because GTA, for example, Grand Theft Auto, lets you beat up people and beat up prostitutes and stuff. But it's
I don't even know. It's just this is another interesting phenomenon that people from outside a community will make up a straw man. If you know people in the reborn doll community, these are typically women, 30s, 40s, who some of them can have kids, some of them are having difficulty having kids, some of them have kids.
Yeah,
and they're just really into it in the same way that you'll find some dudes really into trains, or they're really into Star Wars, and they get into making cosplay or something, the perfect cosplay. And their hobby, 8 hours a day, is spent thinking about how to make the perfect stormtrooper outfit. And they're really into it, and they have a community and they buy a lot of materials. Reborn doll people, it feels very similar to that, but for them, their jollies that they're getting off on is this interaction that they have with the doll as if it were a baby. They'll
right.
They'll
and
hang
I'm just
out with
exploring
the baby
where you start running into trouble. For example, imagine that they used photos on Facebook of real babies to model their real dolls, the real babies out of.
Yeah.
At some point, that might become an issue for the people who are the parents of the real babies, right?
Okay.
They might say, well, no, you don't have the rights to use the likeness of my baby.
Again, I don't know why. I don't know how that comes. If you're just grasping at any possibility, that's not a problem in the reborn doll community. They don't use.
It's not about grasping. The question was, is there anything wrong? And I'm thinking, so far, I guess not. But I am wondering, where are there lines around this topic? And there must be some lines.
Harm is the line.
Well, yeah, but you haven't demonstrated that nothing can be harmful out of this whole endeavor. I'm just thinking you're probably right that it's not harmful.
Yeah.
But I don't know where it starts being harmful.
When it starts being harmful.
Yeah, but we don't know when that is.
If it ever does.
Well, but we don't want to only retroactively address issues, right? Like,
if someone's like, I'm going to wave a gun at a McDonald's and I'm not going to shoot anyone, and we'll just hope that I don't pull the trigger and kill anyone, then I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, there's a high likelihood that you're going to accidentally hurt someone. People buying a doll in the privacy of their own home and feeding it and carrying it around the house and singing songs to it and cuddling with it or something. I have a hard time imagining that crossing a very thin line between that and, like, I'm trying to imagine any harm to another human being.
Yeah. And
I'm trying to imagine anything that happened, and again, we don't have these conversations about dudes with trains. We don't have these conversations in our world anyway about dudes who dress up in cosplay. We don't have these conversations about dudes who go, and I think it is based on sexism, honestly. I think that there are certain, or just honestly, I think the further you get away, because I think our culture is dominated by internet culture these days. And I think internet culture is dominated by a certain demographic of people, younger men who mansplain, essentially.
Yeah.
And the further you get away from, because, you would have a hard time online stigmatizing, Counter-Strike, for example. You'd have a hard time stigmatizing Fortnite.
Right.
It's hard to stigmatize those things because the internet will instantly slap you back. But when it comes to reborn dolls, now we're talking about something that's very far flung from that demographic and therefore very easily stigmatized and hated upon, when it's like, well, what's it to you? Now, maybe someone can tell me about that half of the reborn doll people are actively sexually abusing children. I can't imagine that being true, but unless there's some data there, then this is something that looks weird to you, just like it does for some people today to see gay people, and it's just not for you. You can be like, well, I don't want to do that, but live and let live. No,
I mean, I can't find something on the surface that would be a problem, other than, to me personally, it's a little creepy, but you're right. Like, my feelings don't matter at all in that, because if someone doesn't find it creepy and they find it helpful, like, why not? And I come from advocating things like, I used to think that, it was anything you did in a video game was fine. It's just that my thinking has evolved in that front, because when I was younger, I just assumed that my mind was not vulnerable to influences. And then I learned that definitely that is not the case. And so then my thinking has evolved into, like, well, I don't know, actually. I don't know what the long-term effects of a video game that we all play that lets us do bad things or whatever. I don't know if there's an effect. And obviously, statistically, it's not true that playing Counter-Strike or whatever leads to, droves of people shooting each other. That's clearly not the case. But at the same time, I don't know if there is some sort of desensitization that happens when we are constantly being mean and cruel in a video game. I don't know. And so I've stopped being so sure of myself when it comes to that topic. So when it comes to this topic, I go, probably you're right. I don't know where the line lies. Like, again, it's probably like you certainly shouldn't make babies that look like real babies unless you happen to have their consent. And beyond that, I'm not sure, if there would be necessary regulations or something like that.
Yeah. Having said all that, are there possible consumers of the Reborn dolls who are suffering from psychosis? Sure. I'm sure there's a percentage, meaning that they literally believe that these Reborn dolls are actual babies. Sure. A percentage of people that do cosplay probably literally believe that they're Darth Vader. Are there possible attachment issues being carried out here where someone is acting out their desire for secure attachment, or they are having a hard time connecting with real humans and dolls are easier? Yeah, it's likely that's happening. Is it possible that some of these people are predators? Again, possible. Hard to know if it's even a problem along those lines. I mean, there's some research showing that if people have an outlet, then they don't actually, perpetrate. But other research shows that if you prime the pump, it actually causes them to perpetrate. So, yeah, it's all possible. But again, you could say that about a lot of things. Cartoons that have children in it, for example. What if a pedophile watches Rugrats? Does that make Rugrats a bad product? No. It's like there's a predator who is utilizing some cultural aspect in a distorted way that the vast majority of the consumers don't use it that way. Next email here. Now, in conclusion, what I'll say is that it took me a while to get to this position where I'm saying this, live and let live. Like with this one in particular, because when you look at the images, it's shocking to my body. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. But then I have to walk myself through it. And again, I think it has to do with being older, that I have seen whole societies go from that thing is creepy to that thing is the farthest from creepy.
Yeah.
And so I have come to realize that my visceral reactivity to creepiness is quite possibly, if not majority of the time, in error. Anonymous listener says, do you think misandry is becoming more common? Berto, do you think misandry is becoming more common?
What is misandry?
Hatred of men, like misogyny.
I see. It's funny, I don't even know the term. I don't know. I haven't seen it in my, I'm not sure. There are some examples of, I wouldn't call it hatred, but of minimization of men that I've not enjoyed over the last decades in sitcoms and even The Simpsons and things like this, where the man of the house is essentially a total idiot. And I think it was an overcompensation for the fact that men were in charge of everything. And so it's funny. It's funny to, look at how idiotic the man actually is.
But that cultural notion kind of rubs off on people in our lives.
Yeah.
And then they would treat you and I as if we're Homer Simpson.
That's right.
You and I would sit down to do something and people would treat us like, oh, there goes another man doing stupid shit again. They're always screwing things up and you're just like, wait, what? How come I'm an idiot now?
So I feel like there's some of that. Other than that, no, I don't think hatred of men has, like, as a thing has increased.
Why do you think some people think it's increasing?
Well, I've heard the argument from the insecure guy population saying, hey, everything is all now about minorities and women, and, us white males are an endangered species, and now I can't even be a man, and I can't be white, and I've heard that, but I think it's BS.
Yeah.
I haven't heard, me personally, I haven't felt any, oppression from being a guy.
Right. Yeah, I think, obviously it's complicated. And I think that's, at least for me, and you're saying this too, that where the rubber meets the road in terms of, as a man, am I experiencing any kind of misandry at all in my life, any kind of sexism towards me at all? And I would say no.
Right.
I mean, there's some rare instances that I can think back over my lifetime where I'd be like, oh, I think I'm being prejudiced against because I'm a man. It's pretty rare. I think that we still live in a man's world, as James Brown talked about, and how I I still have massive amounts of privilege. When I say things, people listen more. When I walk up to someone, like there's some construction going on around our house, and I feel like, and sometimes they're blocking our driveway, and so I feel like when I walk up, I get more respect than when my wife walks up to them, and says, "Hey, can you move your car?" And there's just a lot of little things like that I think are still absolutely present. So in terms of hatred towards men, I certainly don't experience it. Having said that, I think that if you just sort of, average out the feelings and the sentiments and the associations that people have about gender, I could imagine, it would be hard to study this, but I could imagine that there, on average, would be a higher increase in negative attributions towards men than there were 30 years ago.
Yeah, I suppose. But when I think back at all, again, this is just anecdotal from my experiences, but things that I have felt, slightly discriminated on over the years are actually because of preferences or things I like that are not stereotypically male. Like, for example, if I'm at a restaurant and I order a fufu fruity drink, the fact that I'm calling it a fufu fruity drink should give you a hint, but people, friends of mine and stuff, like, "Oh, is that what you're gonna drink?" The implication being that I'm like gay or something, and I'm like less of a man. Well, A, this has never bothered me because I want the drink that I want, and I happen to like fruity drinks. But B, it is funny that it's like, well, what's the problem? But that's not because I'm a man. It's because theoretically I'm doing something that a man wouldn't do. And I guess that's a kind of hatred. I haven't seen it increase, though, if anything.
I would only consider
a lot less of that these days.
I think that's more toxic masculinity topic, but the only way that would be misandry is if people were, I don't know. That's not how I would frame it. Of course, people could frame
exactly. So I honestly struggle to think of...
Truly, in fact, it's misogyny because women are supposed to have fruity drinks. And if a man does something a woman does, then that's disgusting. Whereas if a woman does something a man does, like she drinks whiskey neat, then she's considered cool, right?
Right.
So if misandry, it would be if
the other way
most
around,
people, the other way around, where women would never drink whiskey neat because that's man thing, and who wants to do what men do? That's gross. Don't be like a man.
Yeah. So I really can't think of a situation where it's been like, oh man, that's right. It's because I'm a man.
Well, I think that especially if you pay attention to certain corners of the internet in terms of what public videos are displayed in certain corners of the internet, you could, in the incel community, for example, you could walk away feeling like, whoa, there's a lot of hatred towards men. Like there's some just blatant prejudice that if you're a man, then you're an asshole just to begin with, right? And so does that happen? Sure. What I would say is that it's a perhaps healthy reaction against misogyny and against sexism for everyone to stand up against men and to balance the scales. And in that process, there's going to be some collateral damage and some, shall we say, misdirected anger,
Right.
And is it a good thing overall? Yes. Is it unfair for some men to experience unfairness as the society convulses towards justice? Yeah. But I wouldn't. Yeah. It would. The world would look really different if misandry was like a thing mainstream. You know what I mean? Like we would have 90% of the Senate would be women, for example. Just one of the examples. Anyway, anonymous listener wrote in responding to our episode in which we talked about moving. Remember when we talked about moving, Berto?
Oh, yeah.
They say, before 14 years old, I moved so much. I think I changed schools 13 times. Endless moves, sometimes multiple in a year. For a long time, this defined me and had a profound impact on me. I have heard you talk about it a little before and then listened to your recent podcast, Why We Move. Could you talk about it more? Berto, what do you think?
Yeah, as we talked about it, for me, I also had a lot of moves when I was younger. And then even as into college, I would move every single year. And then even after college, I was moving at first every year. And then Then it started slowing down, but certainly the moves as a child had a huge impact because I moved when I was like almost two with my parents from Colombia to a brand new country, the U.S., into an environment with no friends or family. Then I moved back to Colombia for a year. Then I went back to the States for 2 years. Then I went back to Colombia for another like 7 years or something.
And you changed schools a lot.
Changed schools, new friends. Sometimes there's family, sometimes there's no family. And so yeah, that was hard. And at the time, it was like when you're a kid, everything's just like here's what we're doing, but it takes a toll. And when I moved at 15, for example, I was very happy to be leaving a dangerous environment and coming to live with my mom. And so I didn't really stop to think about just the impact of leaving it all behind and leaving all my friends and all the rest of my family and everything.
What about the frequent moving? Because for me, my general hypothesis about people who experience those frequent moves, a common psychological damaging effect is the inability to, when you go to school, for me, for example, I lived in the same neighborhood my entire life growing up. So I went to preschool with the same people I graduated from high school with. And so every year when I went to, the next grade, when I went from 5th grade to 6th grade, 98% of the people, I knew them not only from last year, but I knew them for years and years. And so they knew me. I knew where I fit in. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. There were friends of mine, like there's this girl, now she's a woman now, obviously 51 years old. I'm guessing Julie was her name. We were best friends in 1st grade, but we were never friends after that. But we went to school together all the way to graduating. So I would see her, I'd bump into her every once in a while, years later, and we just always had like a connection because we were best friends, and we would play these. We would make little dolls out of our erasers, and we made little storylines with our erasers.
That's so cute.
At recess, and we were obsessed, the two of us, but we weren't friends in 2nd grade or beyond. We were very different groups, but
that connection at that time.
Right. So just think about like all the people that I had that situation with, and I felt so secure. I felt so, and I felt generally insecure as well, just because I was, 6th grade or whatever. I can't imagine having to go to a new school frequently and completely have to integrate yourself again, go through the bullying and the who's the new kid and people ignoring you, and you're scared and you don't know anyone, you don't know the teachers, you don't know the community. And that repeated experience, I just imagine could really do a number on your self-esteem, on your attachment security, on your self concept. But I don't know, you seem to have turned out all right. So how did you go through that?
I mean, it was, I think, attributable to the family I did have around when I was, around family was very loving and supportive to me. And I had a few tools given to me both genetically and through just looking at how the people around me behaved that were maybe a little more on the extroverted side and a little more social side. So that made it easier for me to integrate. But I also got lucky, I could have ended up in worse environments a lot of the times. I'd say probably the least healthy environment I was in New York when I was there from 5 to 7. That was the least healthy situation. But other than that, I kind of got lucky in, I went to a fairly good school, a good school in Colombia, and I had good friends, and I didn't get involved in any sort of bad stuff. And then when I came up here, I made good friends too. And, so there is definitely a lot of luck involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could be argued that the sexual abuse you experienced when you were 5 was a indirect product of having moved, because if you were in a community where you knew people and people knew your people, like you would have been less vulnerable to that sort of thing, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, in conclusion, what I'll say is that I've worked with clients where the primary trauma was that they moved a lot as a child and had to go to new schools. And even if there wasn't any bullying, if there wasn't any direct story of just like, yeah, and then there's this one year where often there was a situation like that, but just the activity of like, by the time you're 12 or something, you give up. If you move around a lot, you're just like, not you, Berto, but for a lot of people, you just say, you know what, I'm just going to read my books and I'm going to assume everyone hates me and I'm a weird, awkward person that no one wants to be with. And that kind of sits you going down a road. Right.
Yeah.
And, I think another thing that happens is the losses that happen, the grief, the constant losses that, when you're in the fourth grade, time goes by so slow. So when you have like a good friend in the fourth, or you have a teacher in the fourth grade and you have to say goodbye to that person forever.
That's a big deal, man.
That's a huge, huge deal. You and I make a friend today and have to say goodbye after being friends for 6 months. It's like, it just doesn't feel the same.
You
usually.
Barely knew him.
Yeah. But back then it was like a lifetime of being
especially because when you're in school, you're spending like, 6-8 hours a day with these people.
Right.
And
yeah. And so these losses and then the demoralization of that, having to do it over and over again, the attachment breakage, the feeling of, well, nothing lasts. I've had clients who have been through that as children, and one of the biggest schemas that will really get in their way is this idea that nothing will last. Even though they intellectually understand that they're in a new situation as an adult, they have control, but they just have this internalized idea that everything ends. And so there's no point in getting attached to anyone or anything because everything is, even though they're actively trying to get long-term relationships or long-term employment or,
right.
but their innards are saying this is going to end, very soon.
So what's the point?
Yeah. So why try? And when you have say you're in a 2-year relationship romantically and there's some conflict, you could easily fall into this mindset of like, well, might as well break it off because it's going to end soon anyway,
Right.
All right, let's take a break. We'll get back. More emails. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an old patron praise, an old OPP. Berto, what do you say?
OPP.
These people became patrons in September of 2019, and not only did they become patrons, which is super cool, but they have stayed loyal patrons ever since September 2019. We got Lisa from God Knows Where. We have Heather from Vermont, Hannah from New York, Isaac from Illinois, Aaron from Madison, Wisconsin, James from Concord, Mass, Cornelius, what a great name, from Reno, Nevada, Chrissy from God Knows Where. We have Rose from God Knows Where. We have Kawika from Tacoma, Washington.
Oh,
your old
Tacoma, my old stomping grounds.
Heather from Phoenix, Arizona. Rachel from Ohio. Joshua from Brisbane, Australia. Deborah from also Australia. Trudy from God Knows Where, and Lara from Lakewood, Colorado. Not because aren't you specifically from Lakewood?
Yeah, Lakewood. It used to be called Tacoma, then they renamed that area Lakewood.
Oh, okay. Thank you all for becoming patrons and staying patrons all of this time. Next email, listener Alex from Providence. She says, is it possible to overcome differences in parenting styles? I have 2 young children with my partner. As they grow, it has become clear that our values and ideas about parenting are not aligned. I'm tired of arguing over things like reliance on screen time, no interest in family activities, not prioritizing education, etc. My partner is just very passive and hands-off. Is this something that can be successfully overcome through couples therapy, or is there some things that just go too deep to change? Berto, do you argue with your wife about parenting?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a universal because none of us ever learned how to do it other than through watching our parents, and our parents made mistakes like crazy because they were also not taught how to do it other than by their parents who make crazy mistakes. So yeah, there's constant, you can read books and you can watch videos about it. But then you also have to go on your gut, and sometimes what works for other people doesn't work for you. I also remember, man, when my first child was 1.5 or something, and it'd be, or maybe even younger, but it'd be the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., and she's screaming, crying, like not crying, screaming, crying. And we've checked all the boxes. Does she need a diaper change? Was she maybe still hungry? Is there something irritating her? Whatever, you just go through it. And nothing is working. And then you just feel like such a failure as a parent. And then you start arguing, well, maybe we should have done this. Well, you didn't do that. And because you're blaming, like there must be some logical explanation. And only through like experience, maybe by the time you're in the second child, you're like, oh, I see. These things are not little robots. They have unpredictable, non-linear behavior. And so we won't be able to actually control the situation often. But yeah, you have all sorts of arguments about how strict should you be? What should punishments be like? What is a good way to yield punishment? Or how should you discipline, and what tone of voice should you take? And what about timeouts? Should you do them? We ended up like doing a time in because we read at some point that it's better to be with the child so they don't feel, it's all these, it's a crazy thing.
Yeah. By the way, I feel like I want to talk about you coming out of the closet as a married father, because I don't know, a few months ago, you and I were talking off the microphone, and I think I was saying that
you were asking me about it.
Yeah, I was like, Berto, do you want to come out of the closet after 13 and a half years and actually say that you're married with kids? Because there are certain questions that and topics that arise in the podcast about being a married father that
which would be useful.
I think you could, really, and plus it just feels weird sometimes to dance around that fact.
Yeah.
And I asked you, and you're like, okay, and you were secretive about it because you just wanted to protect everyone's privacy, which I can relate to. And
yeah, I barely talk about my current life. I mean, I talk about all my past and things. I mention a few people in my life, like my brother, maybe my mom, my dad, but I try to avoid, and so that was one of the things, is I didn't really want to be like, hey, here's who I am, here's where I live, here's where, because it's like weird. You're talking to the internet. But at this point, it was like, well, whatever, let's just.
And you've been on 4chan and 8chan, so you understand how bad it can get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so, so I asked you, and you said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And then I came up with this joke that was in a very Berto style. And I was like, wouldn't it be funny if Berto launches into talking about his wife and kids, and then I say, Berto, enough of you. You're and your wife. And as a way of trolling listeners, but I was hoping that the knowledgeable listeners would instantly know that I was joking because they knew that Berto had literally never talked about it before, because it was such a stark joke,
Instead, we were too dry about it.
Instead, I was too dry, and people yelled at me and were like, Kirk, don't shut Berto down. How dare you?
He's rarely ever talks about this.
Yeah. How can you be such an asshole? And I'm like, humor people? But I figured those people must not have listened very long, because I just figured if you've listened for longer than a couple of years, you know that he's never talked about it before.
Well, it's similar, like people that ask me what my job is, where if like you've listened to any of the episodes, you would know what my job is.
Right.
So it's just a matter of not knowing.
Yeah. So, but I think it's great that you've come out of the closet in this way, and it's a personal choice. And I keep certain things in my personal life private on the podcast that people ask about frequently. And
what if it's all a double troll and I'm not even what if I'm like not even 21 yet?
Every episode you come up with a new, you're like,
I have my 7 kids and
and you have 5 wives or something. So in answer to your question, Alex, about you and your partner disagreeing about how to parent the kids, sounds like you're more of the structured parent and your partner is more passive, hands off. I as a couples and family therapist, worked with a lot of parents on this issue, and there were certain, and Berto, you kind of brought this up, there were certain things that I needed to establish with the couple. One of the very first things is I spent a lot of time destigmatizing the fact that they were having troubles.
Right.
There's this idea, I think particularly in America, where if you're having troubles with your kids, you're failing. There's always an answer. The internet will say, well, you do this and you do that. And even grandparents, I think sometimes grandparents forget how hard it was.
Yeah.
And they only remember the good times, And so there's this...
They'll backseat drive your parenting.
Yeah. There's this idea that somehow if a child is presenting a problem like, colicky crying all night long, then you must not be doing something,
Right.
or you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. And there's so many things to dial in today's parenting. There's different breastfeeding techniques. There's different formula. There's different bedtime routines. There's different timeouts or time-ins, or there's different ways of holding the child. There's different, what if you had siblings or animals? There's dust in the air. There's different medications, and there's all these things that you can really obsess about. And you should, as a parent, give it your best shot. But the first thing that I do with parents is say, like, there's a chance that everything that you're seeing from your child has nothing to do with you. There's a chance it does have something to do with you, but there's also a chance it has nothing to do with you. So take your grip off of it's sort of like I'm trying to teach someone to drive, and they have this steel grip, vice grip on the steering wheel. It's just like, relax a little. We're not going to be able to learn how to drive if you're just like, every muscle is tense. Like, you've got to loosen up a little bit, make some jokes about it. Like, and then the other thing I say to parents is, there's no way not to screw up your child. Everyone screws up their children in the same way that no couple doesn't yell at each other eventually.
That's right.
When you get married, no one logically believes that you're never going to have a fight. It's like, you're going to have a fight. I hope no one believes that. Gottman showed that 60% of fights never get resolved, in good couples. These are couples that actually work out. They're satisfied with each other.
Great friends have fights,
right?
And they don't live together.
Right. You and I have had fights. So, you're going to screw up your child. Your child is going to need some therapy because of you, because of who you are or how you parented it. It's just how things are going to be. And that's the norm. So, loosen your grip, stop having this perfectionistic notion of parenting. So that's the other thing. The other thing that I really hammer home with parents, and this is all before we get into like how to be a parent. This is all like, I need to deprogram them. It's like, I'm like trying to unbrainwash a cult member or something. And the other thing I will get across to parents is, there's a range of parenting styles that are healthy. And you two probably are both within the healthy range, but you're at different ends of the range on some issues. One person is passive, the other person is more structured. Both of you, if you were to parent alone, would raise perfectly healthy kids. Might there be some differences in personality or tendencies of the kids of a structured parent or a passive parent? Sure. But those kids would be fine. They'd have pros and cons in their personality traits. So get it out of your head that because my partner is different than me means that they're wrong. It's not that. Now, they might be wrong. There's wrong parenting. There's abusive parenting or too passive parenting. But oftentimes, at least 9 toes are in the realm of healthy parenting. And so we have to recognize that. And so it's not a matter of winning, because if you believe that your structured parenting is the only way to parent, then you believe that any divergence from that parenting is actually abusing your child. If you believe that you have a monopoly, you're in the exact sweet spot of parenting, then any divergence away from that is harming the child unnecessarily. Whereas that is not necessarily true. There's lots of ways to raise healthy kids. And a lot of it has to do with attachment, not about structure. A passive parent can have a very good, secure attachment with a child and be very lackadaisical about things. Now, the kid might be a little spoiled. The kid might be a little floppy, a little rough around the edges, a little chaotic, but sometimes that's a good thing in life, to
Yeah.
be a little free. That who knows? But so that's another thing. And then from there, once I really deprogram them, then I say, okay, it's not about what exactly you do in each parenting. It's how the two of you come to the decision about what to do. So we could go with the passive. We could go with the structured. Either's fine. But how do you work it out? How do you talk about it? How do you negotiate that? How do you, and you don't have to meet in the middle. You can, but you could meet someone where they're at. You could be like, okay, on this issue, today I'm going to be structured. And tomorrow when we go to the aquarium, we'll be more passive, whatever it is. But how do you work it out? Because that's a much different approach than how do I get my partner to be like me?
Right.
How do I get my partner to parent the way I parent? Instead, it's like, oh, I have to respect my partner and how they parent. The other thing, a phenomenon that happens in parenting, is that when you conflict about parenting, you end up having your certain, you shall not pass. I'm trying to, what there are certain.
You shall not pass.
Yeah, there are certain topics that parents will become over time through conflict bifurcated on, like if one parent's like, look, like say bedtime, one parent's like, look, I don't need the kids to go to bed. I don't need them to have their teeth brushed exactly at 7:55. Like if it's 8:15, if we're watching a movie and things get a little long, like, let's let that one go. And the other parent's like, no, they have to be ready for bed before 8:00, because 8:00 is when they're in bed. Because if we don't follow that, routine, then the kids, you give them an inch, they take a mile or whatever. And both are right, And so the more you fight about that, the more you believe like, no, I will never give in. You talk to all your friends, you go online and you find all this confirmation bias of your position. And then you both end up digging in and dying on a hill that it's not that important, On the African savannah during the Pleistocene, there was no bedtime. So let it go, There also was no school, but like, and so with a lot of the parents, I would reduce it down to this foundational aspect of, does your child feel loved by you?
Right.
And we would talk, okay, tell me all the ways in which each of you knows that your child feels loved by you. And we'd spend a lot of time in that zone. Does your child feel safe? Does your child feel like they can say things or do things or complain to you? Do they feel like they can ask for things? Do they feel safe with you, in and out of the home? Yes, they feel safe. Okay, you're doing 99%.
Right.
You're just bickering about the little crap, You're bickering about the little things.
How much TV should we let the kid watch?
Yeah, it's like, there's debates, and there's pros and cons. But does your child feel loved? Do they feel safe? Do they feel like they can come to you? Are they getting their needs met? Are they getting enough sleep? Are they getting enough food?
Right.
Then are they getting enough entertainment? Then you're golden. You're way beyond, average parents if you're doing.
But
all those
are they
things.
getting accepted to the right kindergarten? And are they getting perfect straight A's?
Oh,
and are they getting into the right college?
Yeah, don't even say. And so along those lines, if we're talking about, because that was often a teenage issue, because a kid would be getting C's or something, or even F's, and they would be, parents as a unit would be dying on that hill against the teenager who wasn't doing well in school. And I would see the parents sacrificing the love and attachment with the kid because they're dying on the hill of academics. And academics are important, of course, but it's not anything close to top priority, And so what I would always say to the parents is like, okay, so what I see you doing, what I hear is that grades are really important to you. Yeah, grades are, and that getting into the right college is really important to you. Yeah, they're really important. Okay. So let's say that you manage to beat this into the child's skull, and through all of your efforts of like punishing them and disciplining them, you manage to get them straight A's. but they hate you the whole time.
Oh.
And as soon as they're 18, they move out and they never want to talk to you again.
What a trade-off.
and let's even just sprinkle a little frosting on this cake and say they end up becoming a top-notch surgeon that's well respected, but they're miserable and they're an asshole. Would you rather have that or a kid who flunks out of high school and becomes a janitor?
Right.
Which one? And the confusion on the parents' faces when I would bring that up, they'd be like, and in my mind, I'm like, there's an obvious answer to this.
Yeah.
A happy janitor who likes himself and is liked by others, but lives paycheck to paycheck is astronomically, in my value system, better off than an asshole, successful, Harvard-educated surgeon who's well respected but is miserable and everyone hates. But to these parents, because of the indoctrination into the capitalistic American system, this was a hard decision for them.
Well, and it's tough because it's not even just American capitalist system. It's the thrust of human survival, right? Like if everyone is only a janitor, then we're actually still in the savannah. And so we've kind of learned this fear of, oh man, I got to contribute. I've got to be the next big thing. And if I'm not only a failure to me and my parents, I'm a failure to all of humanity. It's a lot to carry on your shoulders.
So for you and your wife, who shall remain nameless, that's another sort of thing that privacy that you want to keep for your family is their identities, their names.
Let's call her Lucy.
And don't look them up because, privacy people. Is one rigid? Is one passive? Are there different things that you frequently will die on a hill about?
Yeah, and it depends on the topic. So I can be very loose on some things and very rigid on others. For example, I tend to be very, rigid, but like I want to make sure they're eating well and eating the right things. She's much more passive on that front.
I feel like we just talked about this. Have we talked about this on the podcast before?
No.
This was off air?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like on the other hand, I'll be a lot more like, oh, it's time for bed. And I'm like, yeah, but they can stay up a little longer. Whereas she's like, no, that screws up the whole routine. And that screws up your morning routine. And I'm the morning person. And it's like, well, and I'm like, yeah, I'll deal with that in the morning.
Wait, you're the morning person?
Yeah.
You're the morning and the night person?
No, it's nighttime's a collaboration, but I'm the morning person.
Oh, but you're a night owl though.
Yeah, although, yes, yeah.
So is that part of the success? Is each of you has your own domain? She's in charge. That
certainly helps. Yeah,
she's in charge of nighttime. Like if there's a disagreement, she wins on the nighttime front, and
But that is where the disagreements happen because like it'll be one of us will be too forgiving and the other one won't want to be, and so then that leads to arguments. And of course, over the years, now this is our second go at it, and well into that, it's like we've evened out on a lot of fronts.
Meaning you've compromised or just let the other person.
We've tried to die on many hills, and we're like, well, we're not cats, so this is not going to work out well. Let's.
What do you mean we're not cats?
We don't have that many lives to die on.
Oh, I see.
So let's compromise, and I think I've realized that I actually need to be more structured when it comes to time. We have talked about time, you and I need to be more structured around time. And I think she knows that she needs to be more structured sometimes around other aspects like, activities and commitments and things like that. So it's a balance.
Berto, enough about your wife.
About my family.
And kids. Anonymous listener wrote in, they said, we got to race through this. We don't have much time left. But we have just a few more emails. Anonymous listener, they say, I had an emotional affair years ago that lasted about 5 years. But even after breaking it off, I still miss them. Is there a functional way to recover from this type of infidelity? We were both married at the time, and each of our spouses were aware of their relationship. Berto, is there a functional way to recover from emotional infidelity? It sounds like this person was
that's
very,
tough.
very attached.
Because if you had, 5 years is a long time to have a friendship, to have a relationship. Even at our age, that's still a long time. And that is going to leave marks. So I think we've mentioned this before. A lot of this comes down to what is the agreement between the parties and what are people comfortable with? What hurts one another? So if it sounds like in this case there was a hurt because of that relationship and it had to come to an end, then if you want your current relationship to work, you're gonna, I think, in my opinion, want to look for ways in which that relationship can be fulfilling in some of the ways that the other thing was. But also, you might look to other friendships or other relationships to help fill some of those gaps. As an example, this is more like with my guy friends, but I've lost friends that were guy friends because we stopped being friends, and that does leave a gap. It leaves a hole, and then I've had to look at, well, okay, how can I fill some of the things that I enjoyed doing with this person with other people? And because otherwise you basically keep just moping about it and never really overcoming that loss. But it becomes that much harder when it's romantic, I imagine.
Yeah. To piggyback on that, I think there are 4 main questions to ask yourself in situations like this. And imagine a lot of you are in similar shoes where there's a past person or even a current person where you find yourself thinking about them. Maybe some of you are even having affairs right now. The questions you should explore in therapy or otherwise is, do you see this extramarital person as an escape? Because for some people, that's what affairs are. It's hard to detect that because all of your feelings are romantic or lust or something, but there's a possibility that your body just perceives this person as a way out, or a way out of your marriage or your life or something, and so that's important to evaluate. Are you running away from something? And maybe you should be running away, but maybe not. It just kind of depends. The other question you should ponder is, are you polyamorous? Are you ethical, non-monogamous? Because if you are poly, then in the same way that if you're gay and you're in a heterosexual marriage, you're not going to be happy, or it's going to be hard. And so it's possible that you might want to explore that. The third question is, do you want to be in your current relationship? And this is the primary question that I think people need to be asking themselves when they notice that they have infidelity motivations. Do you want to be in your current relationship? And for some people, that's a very difficult question to answer. It's a very difficult question for some people to even know what they want in general. So that can be a whole other topic of, do I ever know what I want? Have I ever even been in connection with that? So that could be a very complicated question, but that is a major question, because if you want to be in your current relationship, but you're having these feelings for another person and you don't have you're not poly or you're not going down that road, then you must do something for your own self-preservation to stop having the infidelity motivations. There's got to be some way of reducing the temptation or something, because if you want to be in your current relationship, it's counter to entertain the infidelity. If you don't want to be in your current relationship, then it really is no wonder that you're having romantic feelings for someone else, because you're not getting your needs met in your current relationship because you don't really want to be with that person for whatever reason. So that's a really central question. Do you want to be in that current relationship? The fourth question is it just a normal feeling of grief for you? This is kind of for you specifically, anonymous listener, it's normal to grieve a relationship. You had a 5-year relationship with this person, and it ended, and you missed them, and you have normal feelings of grief and loss. This is something that I think a lot of people don't acknowledge, which is that, like, let's say you get divorced and then 10, 20 years later, you still have feelings for that person. I feel like most people would consider that to be strange, but it's not. or you have a breakup. You say you date someone for 2 years, and then 7 years later, you still kind of miss them. You still have something. One of the things on the reality TV shows that I watch that happens sometimes is they'll get a text from a former partner, and the new partner is like, "Ooh, you got a text from Jennifer. How are you still talking to Jennifer?" And Tom will be like, "Well, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes she texts me. I don't know what to say. Do you still have feelings for her?" And, and Tom will be like, "No, I mean, but, sometimes I kind of miss her." And then, the new girlfriend's like, "Screw this. I'm out of here." And it's like, do you want to marry a robot, an alien? Because if people have had past relationships, if any, past a certain level of significance, it is not only normal, but it's a healthy thing to hold on to some of those feelings, especially if the relationship didn't end in a really horrific way. If the former partner was this, sadistic, abusive person, then you'd be like, huh? But, in the regular everyday life, you break up because, you fight a lot or you go to your different ways or something, but you still have, you still have part of you that is attached. Neurologically, we become used to certain people, That's how our brains work, That's how
even when it didn't end well. Like, I had a girlfriend in high school that meant a lot to me, and it didn't end well. She wasn't good for me in the long run. But there were a few, like even maybe only 2 months, where it was wonderful. And she wrote me all these wonderful letters, and we had these really, truly connective moments. And I will always remember and cherish that. And if someone's like, "Do you still have feelings?" Well, I have feelings for those moments,
Ooh,
and
I'm telling your wife.
Oh, I mean, no, this is not me. I'm talking about hypothetically.
See what you have.
And yet, and yes, sure. If in a moment, I got a text from this person, like, "Do you want to leave your wife and go with me?" Of course, I'd drop everything and leave in a moment. But that's not the point. The point. Of course, it's impossible to have these. I agree with you. It's impossible to be a human, have these relationships, even short-lived ones, and not have at least little memories, little moments that stick with you.
Listener Doug says, "Is it cheating to carry on a completely platonic relationship with an ex when your current partner has a problem with it? My fiance found out that I had coffee with my ex and that I had been loosely communicating with her for the past year or so. Is that cheating?" Berto, what do you think?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, probably, because I have very funny boundaries when it comes to these sorts of things. I still am, I have been friends at different times with exes, and, I communicate with them, and I don't know. I don't see any problem with it personally, but that's just my perspective on it. So now where I think it becomes a problem is if it's like behind the back, and maybe it's
right.
It's supposed, it starts something that could hurt the other person. It starts hurting the relationship, etc. I think that's a problem.
Right. Doug, I think that's what's going on, is that it's in your sentence. My fiance found out.
Oh, yes.
Yes. How did she find out?
Yeah.
You should have told her.
Yeah.
One, doesn't look good when she, quote unquote, finds out. Two, sometimes that's the primary hurt is, right. How come you didn't tell me? Actually, Berto, you did this to me this is one of our handful of huge fights, is that
right.
I didn't have a problem with things that you were doing. I had a problem with the fact that you hid it from me. And I'm like, why did you hide that from me? That doesn't make any sense,
Right.
And that really betrays trust. You're just like, well, one, what else are you lying about? And two, do you, because there's a certain, we're in this constant definition of relationships. And if someone withholds something from you, it kind of says you're not in the inner circle. You're considered to be outside of my true friends or something. And it hurts, And so the key is you got to say, now, maybe your partner has a problem and you need to go to therapy for it. and that's why you avoided it. But yeah, being friends with an ex, platonic friends with an ex, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. There's only something wrong. Okay, so this is semi-analogous to the porn issue, which I talked about in a recent episode. There's nothing inherently immoral or destructive about watching porn. We can debate the ethics of porn. Of course, there's sex trafficking and there's all sorts of problems. There's, some ill effects to porn consumption, but generally speaking, it's just an expression of human sexuality. And the issue isn't necessarily that someone's watching porn. The issue is if your partner is going to be upset about you watching porn. And this is why you need to have conversations up front. Like in the beginning of a relationship, you would want to say, I am platonic friends with one of my exes. Is that okay with you? You need to have that kind of conversation. Now, maybe your partner is like, well, that's kind of challenging. You have a conversation around it. And for some partners, that might be a deal breaker. They may be like, no, you can't, I'm not going to be friends with any of my exes, and you cannot be friends with any of your exes. It's one of those things that you should establish up front. We tend to look at these things as like, it's okay to be friends with your ex. It's okay to look at porn. It's okay to fantasize about someone else while you're having sex with someone. Well, yeah, but these are conversations you should be having up front so that if your partner sees it differently, then you don't transgress upon that. Just be upfront about these things is my point.
Agreed. By the way, Kirk, do you know that your shirt, which has a cat, I think that's Michelle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your cat, Michelle. I always look at it and it looks like sunglasses to me, like someone wearing sunglasses. The tail looks like the little hook that goes around the ear, and then the two black spots those two look like sunglasses. And
I never thought about that.
It's so weird.
That's funny.
Yeah.
By the way, you can buy this shirt on our merch site on Teespring.
My cat wants to chime in.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful
funny.
Shirt.
Someone DM'd me on Instagram saying that or commented or something, saying that they saw someone wearing this shirt at a grocery store.
Oh, really?
And they connected or were like, oh, you must listen to Psychology in Seattle.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I know. I was just so delighted by that, and especially awesome. This shirt, because it was such a sentimental shirt.
That happens to me with the Rick and Morty t-shirt. Like every now and then I have my Game of Thrones Rick and Morty t-shirt where Rick is sitting on the Game of Thrones, and every now and then I get someone like looking over and giving me the thumbs up.
Did you know the new Game of Thrones show is coming out kind of soon?
I thought no, they had two and they canceled one of them. And I guess the other one is not canceled. So no, I didn't really know.
Oh, the new Boba Fett TV show is out. Did you know that?
Have you seen it? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, one episode is out
Okay, is it good?
Yeah. I mean, It's not... I don't know if it's going to be as good as second season Mandalorian, but it's in this very similar kind of vibe.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of fun to see Boba Fett, and they start off where we left off with him and, return. So
we get to see what's up.
Yeah. You get to see like how in the world did he survive?
Nice.
Yeah. Listener Nat says, could you please do an episode on regret and how to deal with it, specifically how to deal with regretting past decisions? Also, listener Susanna from North Carolina had a similar question. What are your thoughts on personal regrets? I'm struggling with hindsight at the moment, and I think it would be helpful to hear about how even successful people such as yourselves still feel regret. Thank you. I appreciate you both. Berto, what do you think?
I've talked a bit about this. I think I actually did a video on my channel about regret. One of the interesting things, and I didn't talk about this in my video because I wasn't talking about my family in there, but I have talked about this aspect. I used to obsess about going back in the past and fixing mistakes. And in my 20s, I did this so often. I would almost every single night before falling asleep, I would lay in bed thinking, man, if I could just go back to such and such date and to just do it over. And here's what I would do different. I would do this. And it would just like permeate my mind. And I would go to sleep just hoping, wishing that I would literally wake up back then. And every night that would happen. And it was obsessive. And that kept going. And I guess over the years, it became a little less obsessive, but it would still happen quite frequently. Then I had my first child. And what was weird about it is it like cured me, because I realized, wait a minute, if I went back in time even a day, this may not play out. It certainly, if I went back 10 years, I would never, the odds are zero. I would never have this child. This is crazy. So like, even if I tried to recreate every moment, which I couldn't because I don't remember most of my moments. And so at that point I realized, oh wow, so the trade-off is, if I went back in time, I would lose out on the most important thing that's happened to me. So now I can't. And ever since then, it's just kind of like this acknowledgement of like, oh, them's the cards that I've been dealt with, and those are the moments I lived, and I stand by them because here I am.
Interesting. Yeah, I think for me, I still have regrets. I did something over Christmas that socially, I don't know if I should regret it, but you know, after a party, it's like, oh, I can't believe I said that thing, and
that thing you said to me, that was really rude and inconsiderate.
Yeah. And so I have those normal regrets. I have them much less as I get older. My cure for this is multifaceted. One is that I always will talk with someone about it. I kind of talk it through. I'm like, okay, so this happened and this happened. And I talk with someone that's a good listener. And so when that person inevitably will say, it doesn't sound that bad to me, that helps a big deal. Because regrets fester in one's mind. And when you put it in the open air and other people are taking a look at it too, and they're just like, I don't think that's that bad. And I think maybe you didn't even do anything wrong, you know, that really helps. The other thing is that I don't know if this is good or bad, but throughout my life, and I think you have a bit of this too, Berto, is I think it might even go back to Risky Business with Tom Cruise in the mid 80s. Uh-huh. His friend, Booger, or I don't know if his name was Booger, but he was the guy from Revenge of the Nerds. But
oh, okay, yeah.
He was also in Moonlighting, the TV show.
I never watched that.
Anyway,
with John McClane.
Yeah, he would say, "Fuck it." I can't remember what he. Sometimes you just got to say "fuck it," and I remember learning that at the age of 12 or something, and it really having kind of a profound philosophical effect on me. I was just like, "Oh, interesting." Sometimes you just got to say "fuck it," and I don't really say that to this day, but I think that's where it kind of began for me. Of like, and I kind of did this about the Christmas gaffe that I made, that I just said, I don't know, fuck it, who cares? Like, you know, I don't give a fuck. Like, yeah, and this is all internal. You know, I'm trying to fall asleep, and it's sort of ruminating through my brain, and it helps, I think, for me to sometimes just say, look, unless you're going to do something about it, fuck, who cares? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so what? You made a mistake and people hate you. Who fucking cares? Like, moving forward in life, you know, unless you're going to do something about it, then fuck them. You know, if they're going to hate me for this, fuck them, you know. And this is kind of the attitude that I will go through with my clients as well. It's just like, let's walk through this, okay? Because, you know, if I was my client and I came to myself and I'd be like, yeah, I think I said, and they described what happened, and they're like, and I'd say like, well, you know, Kirk, what are you worried about? I'd be like, well, I'm worried that people judge me and they're going to hate me and they think bad things about me. And I'd be like, so what? You know, one, you know, it's probably not going to happen. But two, if they rejected you over that, do you really want them in your life? You know, like if your relationship with that person is that fragile, my goodness, what a terrible relationship. So I think that's another part of it.
Yeah, in that spirit. So I've mentioned the play Waiting for Godot, or Godot. I don't know how you say it, but it's a nonsensical play. But the beginning, these two dudes are in the middle of nowhere, and one of them says, he's like obviously hurt and kind of audibly complaining about something, and he says, "There's nothing to be done," and then the other one says, "I'm beginning to come around to that opinion." And it's got two meanings, because one of them is like, man, there's nothing to be done, like kind of a pessimistic side. But then there's also the optimistic side, which is, fuck it. There's nothing to be done.
Right.
And it's really fascinating. So, by the way, I'm not, what I said earlier is not to say, like, I don't think that there's things I've done that are bad. I've done some really stupid, harmful things, both to myself and others. And I suppose if I could wave a magic wand and take them back without affecting all the good things in my life, I would. But it's more of the obsession is what I no longer have. The obsession of, oh man, I've messed up so many moments, and that obsession.
Well, which brings me to my third point, which is that investigate the basis, the foundation of the regret. Like for you, Berto, back then, before you had your first child, if I were to say, well, let's say you do have a magic wand and you're able to write those, 10, your top 10 regrets, what would be different today? What would it be?
Well, so if I had been self-aware enough at the time, I actually would have realized that I needed to go back all the way to the beginning with my mom and dad. But at the time, everything would be more about, like, it was like, okay, if I could go back to the first day of high school in Tacoma, and then it'd be like, oh, I would do more homework, and I would actually do more daily workouts, and I would, it was all, and I would play guitar more frequently, and I would do my piano practice.
Okay, so presumably you'd maybe be making more money, you'd be a better musician.
Then what? Better health.
What's the outcome from that?
I'm a Superman.
What do you mean?
I'm a superhuman, I'm one of the best people.
And people see that, or
I'm praised and famous, and
exactly.
And
that's what it's based on. For you, your regrets were, I'm not famous. I'm not rich and famous and powerful. What's happening here? Yeah, if I could go back in time, I think for other people it would be, I'm not financially, solvent. If I could go back in time, I'm not lovable. If I could go back in time, and when you attack that premise, then we're actually getting some work done, because there's nothing you can do about becoming rich and famous. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to happen. And two, that's not what's good in life, right? It's not why we're on this planet. So there's that, which leads me to my final kind of resilience element against regret, which is feeling like you are enjoying your life. And I would argue, Berto, that having a kid was that it reoriented your priorities. You're like, oh, I'm no longer on this planet for me. I'm on this planet for my child. And my child is happy and has and I don't regret having my child. And I know my child eclipses my, irrational desire to be rich and famous.
There was that, and there was also this selfish part of it, which is that my child brought me a lot of happiness. And so I was like, well, no matter what, if I had to give this up, I wouldn't, for any number of additional things you could promise me. So therefore, there is no price to be paid. So going back in time is now irrevocably not an option.
Right. And I think the one thing I still regret, I don't think there's any way around it, is that I have spent a good amount of time and energy worrying about things that was not useful to worry about. Sleepless nights, ruminating about something that felt very possible and very relevant. But looking back, I'm like, you wasted all of that time and energy on nothing. And 99% of the time, that was the case. There's a pretty rare situations where that worrying rumination time was actually worth it in today's, light. So I do regret that. I do regret, if I could go back in time and do one thing, it would be like, but I don't think I'd believe myself. Or if there was a magic wand, I suppose I would be able to just sort of go back in time and like go, Kirk, you no longer will worry as much about
right.
it's okay. You're okay. The bad thing won't happen, you know? So I do regret that, but I don't know if I think that's just kind of the human condition.
Yeah.
Listener Casey, she says, do you have to move on and forgive those who have hurt you? I have known my in-laws for 7 years now, and they have never accepted me for who I am and have gossiped about me to other people in the family. I confronted them last year about it and asked for an apology, but they refused to accept that they hurt me. I keep being told to move on and that it was in the past, but should I? Is there an amount of time people should move on by? Berto, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, depends on the injury. I don't think there's any obligation. Like, look, it all depends on what you value or what is most important. So, for example, if having a healthy family dynamic with your in-laws is important because maybe it's important to your relationship, or maybe you have children and it's important because they're grandparents or things like that, well then yeah, maybe you need to, at least on the surface, quote unquote, move on so that you can have a functional, practical relationship. Again, this is my opinion. As an example, there are things that I don't see eye to eye with family members, but I sort of pragmatically decide to move on in a way where I can have a functional relationship with those pieces of my family. Now, but I'm under no obligation. I also think I know people who have drawn clear lines in the sand and have kept to them. And, you know, that is a choice. And if they feel that that's more valuable to them, I think that's important. So if in your case, you moving on would mean that you're constantly feeling like you're betrayed, or it's really painful to you, then I don't think that's healthy. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. I believe that if there's something that you care enough about, no one should tell you or expect from you to just like forget it and ignore it, especially if they haven't truly come to terms with an apology and how they hurt you. At the same time, if you think it's for the benefit of other aspects of your life, that you just sort of like put that to the side and move on, that is something you should feel empowered to do. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Casey, what I hear in your email, I'm just going to take some speculations and guesses here, is that your partner is trying to convince you to make up with their family, because you're saying, you know, I keep being told to move on. So I'm guessing your partner is telling you to move on, and you're saying, but, you know, is there an amount of time that I should just move on? Is there some sort of like mandate that I move on? And no, there's not. It's a choice that you make, Casey. You can literally never move on and choose to have whatever opinion you do about your in-laws that you want. Now, the other side to this is that when you marry someone, you marry their family. And a lot of, particularly Americans, deny this. And some relationships are like this because some people are really cut off from their family of origin, but a lot of people aren't. And so when you, in the same way that if you have a fight with your partner, if you want to sustain the relationship, you got to work that out. And that might mean giving in or compromising or
moving on.
Or moving on. In the same way, it's the same with your partner's family, that even though they might have done something wrong and you're right, you have to deal with that, because, you know, there's this notion I find that a lot of Americans will hold that is just not possible in my family because we're tight knit, is like, well, yeah, I like him, but I hate his family. And I'm like, that ain't going to work, you know, because if Stacy was like that with my family, so many events would just be ruined by that in the air, you know, or even if she didn't say, she just didn't show, like that would be really rough. And other people are just like, well, what do I care? It's your family. Do what you want with them. You know, and I'm like, it's not how my family operates. So, now I don't know what happened, Casey. Maybe your in-laws are psychopathic, abusive a-holes, and you're doing everything you can, and you should never move on because they've done horrible, horrible things. There's that end of the spectrum. There's the other end of the spectrum where you and your in-laws are at fault. You both have contributed to the conflict. And it's been, you say, I have known my in-laws for 7 years and they have never accepted me for who I am and have gossiped about me. Now, is that them being psychopathic a-holes, or is this a dynamic that built between you and them due to the fact that neither side valued the importance of this bond? So I've been with so many people as they go through these transitions, various different transitions, whether it's in the beginning of a relationship or during a divorce. It's incredibly important that even though you don't, when you wake up in the morning, you're not just like, oh, I can't wait to bond with my in-laws. Like, that's not a thing that you care about. It's not a thing that emerges from within you. But unless you cultivate those relationships, then these kinds of things can happen. So, now, I don't know this, Casey. Again, they could be psychopathic a-holes. But there's a possibility that you also contributed to the discomfort in the very beginning, which ended up cascading into what's been happening now 7 years later. Now, how do you go back from that? I don't know. But family therapy comes to mind. So I don't know enough to advise specifically. But Casey, it's up to you. It's a personal choice you make. And you can... Anyway, anonymous patron says, I'm Venezuelan and I live in Canada. I have encountered multiple cases of Canadians attacking us when I talk Spanish. When we share these stories with other immigrants, they tell us similar stories. The Canadians threaten us with police, offending us, and threatening to throw us out of restaurants without any crime being committed just because we're speaking Spanish.
What?
People say Canadians are polite and immigrant friendly, but not our experience. Any tips on how to deal with this kind of entitled people? Berto, what do you think?
Oh my God, that sounds horrible. I don't remember ever experiencing that like that, where I'm talking in Spanish and someone does one of those things like, hey, don't speak that, whatever.
But you could certainly imagine that happening in North America.
Absolutely. I know it for a fact. It happens to so many people. I know, as an example of a weird counterexample, when my mom was traveling with her friends, her white, very waspy looking friends in Spain, my mom started by talking Spanish, and in part of Spain, not all of Spain, in part of Spain, she was discriminated against tremendously because they heard her Colombian accent and they just looked down, this specific area or whatever, they looked down on the colonies, on the non-real Spaniards. And so then, two things, she started talking in English because she had noticed that when her friends, the gringos, were talking, they would be treated very nicely. But then she started talking in English and then everything was better. So I know that these kinds of things happen in different cultural pockets. I think it's horrible how to deal with it. So I certainly, my fighter instinct in me would be like, wow, you just gotta, that's not acceptable. You gotta stand up. But I realized that if the culture is such that they would even call the authorities, I mean, that would be frightening because of how much, in some areas of this country, I would be scared to death, literally. Like if I were in the South in some place where we know a lot of bad things have happened and someone called the cops on me because I was speaking Spanish, I wouldn't actually try to fight for my rights because I would be afraid of getting shot to death. I don't know what that situation is like, and I don't know which part of Canada they're in. If it got bad enough, I would seriously consider relocating. Definitely not frequenting that establishment. I would probably try to use social media to my advantage in that sense. But man, I feel terrible for that situation. It's not something anyone should have to go through.
Yeah, it's awful and absolutely believable. Whenever people ask these questions, I think, well, another analogy to this is if I'm parked in a parking lot and someone crashes into me with their truck and then, hit and run, they speed off. And then I say, how am I supposed to deal with this? It's like, well, there's no way to win from that. someone has done something wrong to you. Because I feel like there's this notion about social situations like this where people are being bigoted, that somehow there's supposed to be a graceful, powerful, satisfying way to deal with it. And that's not possible because the damage is already done. Yep. Someone has harmed you socially, and there's only ways to lessen the problem. There's already a problem. The damage is already done. There's ways of lowering the risk of further damage happening. If you were to stand up and slap him across the face, then that's going to escalate it. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Having a snappy comeback might be kind of self-satisfying, but the other person is going to be like, "Oh my God, you're right." Like you're not going to change their mind. Getting the police to back off because of blah blah blah. The attitudes are there, and the societal, and even if you did manage to change that person's mind, there's millions of people standing right behind that person, just as frothy about their racism. So it's how do you deal with it? I don't know. So just divorce yourself from the idea that there's some kind of graceful win that you can get out of it. Now, what I recommend people do, and I'm not someone that does this, this is just my own personal preference, because I've seen a number of different, viral videos along these lines, is take out your phone, film them, and say nothing.
Yeah.
When I see people do that, let the idiot dig their own grave. Yeah. Don't argue, especially don't raise your voice. Just be like, okay. So what I'm hearing you say is you don't think it's okay for me to speak Spanish in this restaurant. Okay. And you just film them, and then decide later on if you want to blur their face and post it or something. But it really makes it absurd, the absurdity, and people who are really a-holes will make it even more absurd when you start filming them. Then it's almost like they're like, I'll show you, I'll give you something to film, and,
yeah.
And it's not a way to win. You're not winning, but it's a way, I think, to cope. You're outing someone.
Yeah.
And also, if the person is ashamed of themselves, they'll go home at night and go, oh my God, that person has a video of me saying those horrible, horrible things.
And we've seen it happen. There's been public apologies, some of which are just out of necessity, some of which seem heartfelt. I think it's important to give a light to these events, because otherwise we assume that they don't happen.
Yeah. I'm not saying you should post it. I'm not, of course, never dox anyone. I don't know what to do with it, but I've just sort of resolved in my mind that if anyone does this to me, that I'm just going to pull out my phone and say nothing. Because there's no way to win. You can't win at the argument, but you can protect yourself by having a record of what happened. If they do call the police or something. So, I don't know if that's the right thing, but that's what I do.
You might also find it useful for yourself in the future, because there have been things that happened to me where I sort of doubted whether I was right. I'm like, wait, maybe I was wrong about that. But then if you can rewatch the video, you'd be like, oh yeah, no. Yeah, I was right.
The other element that you're bringing up, anonymous patron, is this idea that people say Canadians are polite and immigrant friendly. No, that's ridiculous. There's this, stereotypes are stereotypes. Now, are Canadians, can they be polite and immigrant friendly? Sure, just like Americans can. Canadians are culturally very similar to Americans. Quebec...
Aren't they Americans too?
Well, yeah, they're North Americans, similar to United Statesians. Quebec, you could say, has a distinct culture from a lot of the United States, and there's a lot of people that live in that area. But you could argue anyway. Point is that some of the most racist things that have ever happened to me as an Asian American have happened in Canada. Some just straight up racist, ignorant bullshit. I'll never forget. I was in an Airbnb. This is in Canada. Airbnbs are, or not Airbnb, but B&B, bread and breakfasts are, because in the States, bed and breakfasts are these really fancy mansions that they renovate into hotels, you know. But in Canada, I went on a road trip, and bed and breakfasts are like Airbnb, where it's just like someone's teenager moved out and you get to like stay in their room. And so that's where I stayed as I was doing a road trip across Canada. And I was in one house, and they invited us up to the living room to hang out. And so I'm hanging out in the living room, we're talking, and they asked me just out of the blue, they said, "Who sponsored you?" And I'm like, "Who sponsored me?" I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, "Well, you know, I know this very, very hardworking, nice Japanese lady down the street, and so-and-so had to sponsor her so that she could come and live in Canada."
Right.
And I still did not understand what this person was saying, because one, I didn't know about sponsors. Like that's, I thought you just immigrated. I didn't know you needed a sponsor. And two, I have no accent. I'm fourth generation. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
In what world does someone just look at my face and assume that I was born in Japan? You know, like I have no accent. I have no Japanese cultural markers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that conversation went on for a long time, and I still didn't realize what she was asking me until one of the other people that lived in the house suddenly realized what was happening and went, "Oh, no. He was probably born in the United States," or something along those lines. And then the conversation took a turn, and I was still utterly confused. I'm like, what is happening? And that was Canadians, you know, and that's not, that's not someone saying, you know, you're a chink or something, but the ignorance and the assumptions that someone would have to go through to get to that conversation. And it wasn't a topic, you know, it wasn't like I was talking about anything that related to that. You know, we were just having a conversation. You know, it really took the "what are you" to a whole other level, you know. And there are, you know, I have Canadian friends, really close friends that are Canadian, and we often will joke about the stereotype of Canadians being nice, and they're like, no, Canadians can be just as much of an asshole as any American can be. So, if you're in Canada and you're experiencing bigotry, you know, it's there. There's tons of bigotry in Canada, just like there's tons of bigotry all over the world, including the United States. Having said that, might there be some signals of some differences along some lines that make Canada better than the United States? Sure. I'm not going to claim that Canada doesn't have some better aspects. I think, you know, they have...
Well, one of the better aspects is that they have maple syrup, which I love.
All right. Last few questions here, Berto, from Discord. These are easy pod. So on Discord, there's a channel called Easy Pod Questions where people can submit their easy pod. So I attached the crow, asked, have you been watching The Kraken at all? If so, thoughts on the team. And
the movie,
I don't know if we did this on the air, but Berto didn't even know we had a hockey team called Kraken. And I say, no, I have not been watching The Kraken because I feel like I have enough sports with football. And so maybe one day I'll get into The Kraken. I'm not really quite sure.
I mean, do you watch hockey? Have you watched hockey?
I have, you know, periodically, but not a lot. I don't really, it's not really my preference of sport. It's fun. And I used to go to games, Thunderbird games here in Seattle. Thoughts on the team? I hear they're terrible, which is not uncommon for an expansion team, and also not uncommon for Seattle. We have a history of especially male teams being terrible. Our female teams are some of the most amazing teams on the planet. Our soccer team, our basketball team are champions. So there's that.
You know, growing up in Colombia, I knew zero about hockey. And I remember coming here when I was like 12 or something. Maybe we were playing one of the Nintendo hockey games, and I remember my friend showing me how you could fight, and I just assumed it was like this weird Easter egg that seemed incredibly fun, where like for whatever reason they decided that you should be able to fight the players.
Yeah.
I'm like, haha, that's funny. And I went through my 20s into my 30s. I think I was in my late 30s or maybe even early 40s when I learned that fighting is literally part of the game.
Yeah. When I would go see Thunderbirds were I think a semi-pro hockey team in Seattle, and I went to a number of the games and the matches. I don't even want to go. And there was always a 3-fight quota, and the rest would let it happen. And if you didn't get 3 fights, then as an audience member, you felt completely ripped off.
Completely cheated.
And so it was always this matter of routine. It's like, you'd be kind of bored, and then all of a sudden, oh, looks like a fight's brewing, and then everyone gets jazzed, which is really just not a good look for humans, by the way. Nini, who we know, good old Nini. Asked,
Nini.
What would you diagnose Marla Singer from Fight Club with?
Oh, Marla.
Well, what symptoms do we see in Marla Singer in the movie?
Okay, so I'm not going to use technical terms, but I'm first going to just describe a few things that I noticed. One, she is flighty as a feather, very chaotic. She is someone that I would perceive as very unreliable. She believes she has a ton of ailments, hence why she is going to a lot of these support groups, and she seems to
I forget.
be
She actually
self-destructive.
She actually believes that she has cancer and all those kinds of things. Or
I don't remember exactly if she.
I think she goes thinks, because she's kind of trolling. She just kind of likes the community, and so
she likes the communities. That's right. But I felt like she also. Maybe you're right. Maybe there wasn't. I felt like for some reason she thought there was a lot of stuff wrong with her, but anyways, and I also think that she was self-destructive in the sense that making bad decisions on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't think there is a diagnosis for what I remember about Marla in Fight Club. There was a certain level of comfort with lying that would perhaps mean she's on the psychopathic spectrum of some sort, but that's hard to know. She, as you were saying, Berto, self-destructive, chaotic, but that's not really a personality disorder or psychiatric disorder. It could be some result of trauma. That would be my first assumption. But really, in the end, she really seemed like a balanced person, who maybe just was young and chaotic and hadn't really figured her life out yet or something. Alex says, can you both be a licensed therapist and a psychiatrist? What if after becoming a licensed therapist, I go to med school and become a psychiatrist so that I can also have the power to prescribe medication? Well, I'll answer this one. Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, it would be extremely redundant to become, say, a master's level therapist and then also go to med school, because there's no overlap in those grads. You would have to start from scratch with a medical degree. The much faster route would be just to become a psychiatrist, because psychiatrists can be therapists, and if they spend enough time in school and supervision, can become just as good as a therapist as anyone else. They often are not, because they either don't concentrate on talk therapy enough, or they have bad supervision, and it can be much more lucrative to focus on medication management than it can be psychotherapy. An hour of psychotherapy pays at most for a psychiatrist, if you're using insurance, like $150 maybe. Whereas if you fit in 7 to 10 med management clients within an hour, then you're making thousands of dollars in that hour, So a lot of psychiatrists. And the other issue is there's a shortage in many communities of prescribers. So you're kind of doing the community a much bigger solid by taking on more med management clients. So, but yeah, I would, there wouldn't be any purpose. The other thing is there are some psychologists who can in some communities prescribe. So you could do that as well. Alex also asked, would you consider collaborating with other YouTube therapists? My answer to that is maybe, and I have kind of done that in the past, but I don't know. I've been a podcaster for 13 and a half years, and I've done a lot of interviews. I've gone on TV and documentaries and radio shows and collabed and done interviews for print media, and I just feel like I've reached this point where it's too much trouble. Like I just want to deny all invites, because I never know what I'm getting into, and I never know if it's going to be worth it. And the 1 out of 5 to 10 times that it's actually really a negative experience, there are times when, because I don't know, someone reaches out to me and it's like, let's collab, and I'm like, okay, and then 1 out of 5 to 10 times it'll be this really horrible negative experience where we're conflicting, or I feel like they're completely wasting my time. It's not the norm, but when it happens every once in a while, it makes me extremely hesitant. And I feel like I've done so much of it that over the years that I'm just kind of like, yeah, been there, done that. I don't really need to do that anymore. So it would have to be a really enticing collab. Plus the other thing is like collab, because that's, on YouTube, a lot of times people will, cross the streams, if you will, different channels. For me, in the times that I've done that, I found that our product is nothing like I thought it would be in our head. And it's always like a really substandard product. So
I will say, as a fan of many YouTube channels, I rarely ever come across a crossover or collab where I'm like, that's better than the original.
Right.
I'm usually like, I'll tolerate it.
Right.
Oftentimes it's not good because like they end up not serving either side.
Right.
Every now and then there's some interesting ones, like especially the science-y channels, where it's like, hey, we collaborated to make this one experiment. But often those collabs each does their own video on their own. Yeah.
And then at the very end of the video, they show, now go watch that other video.
Yeah. Now, the things I have liked and enjoyed are sometimes, like I think I've talked about this one. There's this bassist that I love. He's like this Italian bassist, which is really good.
Yeah, no. He makes comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's
hilarious.
Had these like fake fights with these 2 violin Asian players and with others. And those are really fun to me because they don't do the video together. They trade jabs at each other. They'll do one video and then they'll respond. So response videos, I feel work a little bit better.
I think you have to be in the comedy world for that to work. Like Uncle Roger and I think Jamie Oliver, or what's the other guy's name? Anyway, it's funny you bring up that bassist. I've been watching him for years, and
he's so good.
He kind of blew up in the last year. Like he became way bigger. Right. And I lament this because for a long time I would try to, collab with other people. That in the beginning of this podcast, it was a big focus of mine of trying to, get famous people on my podcast, kind of a thing. And I always hated it when people turned me down. When I would reach out, say, "Hey, you want to come on the podcast?" They'd be like, "Yeah, no," or I'd reach out to an author or something along those lines, and it always bummed me out. I'd be like, I never want to be that person. If I ever get to that point where people are reaching out to me, I don't want to be that stodgy person who doesn't do things. And I never understood why. I'm like, I'll worship you. You come on my podcast, I'm just going to worship you. That why would you not want to do that?
But now you kind of get it.
But now I kind of get it. I'm not saying that people are going to worship me, but it's like, again, if every time was average to better, I would do it. But it's those times when it will ruin my week. I mean, there was this one guy, they were going to do a full kind of, it was a print media, and they were going to do this full like section, this full like 1/3 of the magazine or something is a short publication. I don't know. It was this a whole layout on me. It was just going to be all about me. They wanted this huge headshot. They were going to go into full detail. It was going to be a number of interviews, and the guy, you know, it was during the pandemic. He reaches out to me over Zoom, and we get on Zoom, and he, first off, the first 10 minutes, he's talking about himself and about how his career is going and how he wasn't really interested in being a journalist. He was more interested in being a travel writer. And I'm listening, and I'm like, is this the interview? Like, because when you're the topic or the subject of an interview, it's sort of like a call and response game that you play. Like, the journalist will ask me a question, and then I give them, 30 seconds of an answer, and then I stop. There's a certain dance to the interview process. It's not a conversation. It's a quote gathering system, And so I kept wondering, like, when are we starting that process? And
I by the way, I've seen a lot of those kinds of quote unquote interviews, and they drive me nuts because I'm like, wait, you were just talking right now. I want to hear your guest. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And so he's and I'm, busy in my day, and I'm thinking, I only have like 15 minutes, and we're 10 minutes in already of this guy talking about how he doesn't want to be doing this right now or something. And and then he asked me like a 5 or so questions that didn't really make any sense. Like, it didn't give me the ability really to answer, or they were really obvious questions, like,
I see.
Like, oh, therapy, it's a pretty weird thing to do, right? That kind of stuff. It was really amateurish. And I was really trying to play along at first because, I'm like, well, they're going to do a full spread on me. I've got to give them something good. I feel quite honored about this. And so I'm like, oh, well, yeah, therapy is kind of strange, but I'm trying to play along. And then eventually I crossed this line where the questions he was asking, I was just like, these are absurd questions. Like, I can't work with these questions. You're not giving me anything to work with here, pal. And so he asked me this question, and I just answered it very bluntly. Like, it was something like, like that, like, therapy's kind of weird. And I'd be like, yep, weird. I just didn't have the energy to like, play along and to like make up for his inadequacies as a journalist. And then he very quickly turned on me. Oh. And he was like, he got angry at me, and he like very quickly hung up on me.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was like, and my heart was racing, because it felt really icky and bad.
Yeah.
And I reached out to the publication because the publication had apparently hired this guy to work with me. And so I reached out to the publication. I'm just like, I don't know what happened, but I think this guy didn't like me or something. And they never got back to me. And it's stuff like that where I'm like, I never know. And many times that stuff like that's happened. and I'm like, if 1 out of every 10 times that happens, which it kind of does, I don't want to do any of it.
Enough to not do it.
Yeah. Which is a bummer, but it makes my life a little easier. Final question from good old Orla. She says, how much time off for Christmas holidays will you take? Berto.
I took 2 weeks.
No
I
work
usually take 2 weeks.
No work at all.
No work at all play. Makes me a dull, anti-dull boy.
For me, I never take any vacations, which included the Christmas vacation. I work all the time on this podcast because...
But before you had the podcast, though, like, would you take time off from therapy, doing therapy? No,
I never.
Okay.
Because the number of reasons. One is that as a therapist, you kind of get indoctrinated into this idea of you don't deserve vacations. 2, when you take vacations, you're interrupting the treatment of several clients.
Oh, sure. And during the holidays, that's especially tricky.
Yeah. Which isn't a problem, of course. It's fine to do that under most circumstances, but it just makes it a little harder. 3, when you're self-employed, you take vacation, you don't make any money.
Right. And if you're not putting content out during those times,
there's no vacation pay for podcasters, and therapists, private practice therapists.
Makes sense.
In terms of this, month, I really like being a podcaster. So,
Yeah.
I was thinking about like if I ever made enough money to retire, and I just thought, well, but I like doing the podcast.
Yeah. Retired to do what? To do the podcast.
Yeah, like it's a fun thing to do,
Yeah.
So anyway.
I think there's a difference between retiring from doing what you are doing versus just being financially independent, right? To where like you don't need the money. So you're doing it, whether it's generating income or not, because you love it. And most people don't get that luxury, but if you can achieve that luxury, that's very great.
Yeah. At the university, though, I would always get 2 weeks off during the Christmas time. So I would always get that time away,
I feel
which
like
definitely
that's
did.
fairly standard.
Yeah, which definitely did feel good to have.
In Colombia, there were two different schedules for schools. One of them was the more gringo version, which is here where the summer break is the big break and the winter break is 2 weeks. But then the more standard one actually used to be the long break was in the Christmas. And this made more sense because being a very Catholic country, Christmas is a huge deal. And it's got a lot of rituals and things that happen. So you'd have like a full month or something, maybe more. And you would get a short break in the quote unquote summer months, because also there is no such thing as summer in Colombia because it's in the equator.
Right.
And so that was always a little tricky with me and my friends, because some of my friends went to that other calendar, and my friends from my school, we were on the gringo calendar, the US calendar. And so we were like, oh, what do you want to do? Blah, blah. I was like, well, no, I'm back in school. It's like, oh, that sucks.
Wait, so in Bogota, some people would have full summer vacations around Christmas while other people only had 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, that would be really disruptive to a community.
Yeah, right? Yes. That's
Final
tricky.
question, Berto. Are we playing Age of Empires tonight?
Oh, absolument. Absolument.
So I experimented with... So Age of Empires is a real-time strategy game that Berto and I play with some other people, and we're getting really good at it. And so I experimented by playing against 2 AIs, which definitely like amped up the difficulty. So I was thinking like we could have more AIs than us. You know what I mean?
You had 2 hardest?
No, I played too hard, which is kind of...
Because 2 hardest by yourself seems...
I don't know.
Oof.
I mean, I feel like my economy building a wonder game is pretty good. The other thing we could do is play against equal AI and don't allow wonders, and say like you have to annihilate the other person's base.
Listen, my brother and I have been struggling because we've been playing on that same Highland map or whatever it's called, high something, the one where it's just forest. There's no way to block yourself out. There's no choke points, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
And we were playing against 2 hardest, and we were both Brits. And one hardest, one hard, we can beat them fairly easily. But the 2 hardest, the problem is that because I'm not doing Mongolian, like we're both trying to like do a wall, do castles, all this kind of stuff. And their attacks come from everywhere. And so we won 1 game, and then 2 games we didn't win. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, I think now if anyone's still listening to this is incredible. But I mean, from what I understand from the experts of Age of Empires, they're like, you have to be harassing. Like,
oh yeah, totally.
There's no way to win if you're not harassing.
Yeah.
So maybe
that's what the AI does very well.
Yeah. So if the 3 of us were playing and you were harassing and we were on the open map, maybe we'd succeed.
Well, that's why, because when I'm Mongolian, I have no choice but to harass because I can't build castles or walls.
Right.
So I have no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. Age of Empires.
Age of Empires.
Well, I won't go down that rabbit hole. I mean, I guess 2021 is also typified by you and I starting to play online together. We played Valheim together for a long time.
That's true. Valheim and then StarCraft.
And now
Age
like
4.
2021 is the year in which
we played.
The birth of our online gaming began.
That's right.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.